Whether you elect him or not, the death of controversial conservative Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia creates a critical void that must be filled on the nation's highest court. Western New England College of Law veteran professor Art Wolf came in to talk about the Scalia legacy and the coming fight to nominate a new justice.
One thing that's overlooked about Justice Scalia is that people think that all the decisions are 5-4, with 4 here, 4 there, and maybe Justice Kennedy providing the swing vote. But that's not really true. There are a lot of decisions in which the court is 6-3, 7-3, unanimous. And I know 2 of my favorite cases that Justice Scalia decided, which I thought in one case he was dissenting, and he eventually, the politics of it really went in his favor, because Congress eventually repealed the law that he was dissenting on. He thought that the law was unconstitutional. And so then he wrote a very nice opinion in an environmental case, and people don't really know Justice Scalia writing an environmental. Yeah. It's kind of unfortunate in some respects that the people always focus on the controversial cases, which I suppose that makes some sense, because some cases are, at least in the view of some, more important than others. But he wrote lots of opinions that were very well done, and he was he was a professor of law before he was on the court.
He was always a very forceful advocate, and there was usually some humor in his. I remember reading one where he really took the folks on the other side of a decision in a dissent. In his dissent, he really took them to task. And at one point he said, your opinion basically amounts to judicial applesauce. I mean, really amazing way of putting things.
Well, that sometimes was, in my view, the downside, because he could be caustic, he could be critical of his colleagues. And I knew him, when he was at the Justice Department years ago. Mm-hmm. And he used to come up to Capitol Hill. I worked for a member of Congress then. He'd come up to Capitol Hill because someone from the Justice Department was testifying and he needed to be there. And he'd come up early, we'd sit around chatting. Very amiable guy, very friendly guy, funny guy. And sometimes on the court, when I saw some of those opinions where he was footnotes or whatever would be critical of his colleagues, I thought to myself, this is not the Justice Scalia I knew from the old days, And when you see him in different contexts, he's usually his friendly self. But sometimes on the court, I don't know what it was. It's almost like Jekyll and Hyde in some respects.
He talked about original intent. What did the framers of the Constitution mean 200 plus years ago? I read once, and I've tried to check this because it didn't seem like something he'd say, but I read that he once said the Constitution, in his opinion, was a dead document, that it didn't change, it couldn't grow. Explain that a little bit, his originalism, what he really, that was a key to who he was and how he thought, I guess.
Well, it was, and it's kind of interesting that he would say that, because one of the things the Supreme Court has said over the years is that when we talk about what the Constitution meant, and they always talked about it, the question is, does it change as the society changes? And we're so much a different nation today than we were in 1789 when the Congress and the president first got up rolling. And so when you talk about originalism, it's what you should do. You should look at history. The court has said many, many times in interpreting the Constitution, one of the factors we look at is history. We look at the structure of the Constitution, we look at our precedents, we look at the text, of course. And so it's only one of several factors. And with him, he put a great deal of stress, maybe to the exclusion of other factors, on the originalism. And which is kind of interesting, because I suppose, the Constitution gives Congress the power to raise the Army and Navy. What about the Air Force? Okay, the Air Force is not mentioned. That means we can't have an Air Force? Well, no, I don't think so. So there's lots of things in the Constitution that aren't mentioned, but yet Congress over the years has legislated on, and the Supreme Court has approved it. So originalism has its virtues, but it also has its vices. And very early in the Supreme Court's history, during the period of when John Marshall was the Chief Justice, the court said very clearly that we have to remember, we're not interpreting a code. We're not interpreting the prolixity of a code, the detail of a code. It's a Constitution we're expounding. And we also must remember that it was designed to endure for ages to come. And that was said by the court very early on. And so if you're an originalist and you're looking back at the early Supreme Court decisions, why wouldn't you look at that opinion and say, well, the court early on knew that it was a document that was going to grow and to accommodate itself to the changing needs of the country.
What a shock, but politics is involved in replacing Justice Scalia. And I know you're following and thinking about it very carefully. quite a constitutional battle brewing potentially between President Obama, who says, I'm going to do what the Constitution says I should do. There's a vacancy on the court. I'm going to put forward a nominee. Republican majority in the Senate, and I guess politically you can see their point of view. They're saying, let's wait and see how the election turns out. Maybe we get a Republican in the White House. Maybe we get a justice more to our liking. What's your sense of the fight that's brewing?
When you look over a period of since the beginning, that there's been 19 justices, including chief justices, that have been appointed in election years. And that's been going on since the beginning. The first one, I think, was 1796, and the last was 1988. Mm-hmm. So it's common practice for presidents to nominate people to the court and for the Senate to approve them, even though it's an election year. So, and when you think about the Chief Justice, who some people think is the first among equals, they've even done that several times. So it's not an uncommon thing. And President Eisenhower, for example, when he was running for re-election in 1956, made a so-called recess appointment. The Senate wasn't even sitting. And he, 3 weeks before the election, appointed someone to the court. And he did, in fact, President Eisenhower, of all his 4 appointments, all of them are recess appointments, which means, the Constitution gives the president the power to appoint officers and judges if the Senate is not in session. So, this is really quite aberrational for the Senate to take that view. And I thought early on that they were just kind of, just talking about it, and particularly when the chairman from Iowa, Grassley, Chuck Grassley, made some comments that he thought, well, we'll see who the president sends up and we'll take it from there. But they've really kind of dug their heels in the last few days. And it's surprising to me because, after all, the president is the president. He was elected by the people 4 years ago, and he's going to be president until January 20th, 2017. So you can't just say, oh, well, he's going out of office. So, in fact, one thing that's interesting too, Jim, is that there have been several appointments by an outgoing president between the election and the inauguration of the next president. And so that's to me the most shocking ones, where the president's sitting there, they're changed, the president is no longer going to be president in a few months between the election and the inauguration, and yet the president has appointed people in that span, and the Senate has approved it. So,
and I know there's an old saw that presidents are often very surprised and sometimes very upset and angered, disappointed by the decisions made by people they put on the court who they think will go one way or the other.
Well, there's the story about President Eisenhower, when he was asked at a press conference late in his second term whether he had made any mistakes in his administration. He said, yes, I have, and 2 of them were sitting on the Supreme Court. And so it's very true that you don't always get what you want if you're the president.
Well, Professor Arthur Wolf, thanks for coming in, putting some perspective on this issue for us. Appreciate it, sir.
Thank you, Jim. Always appreciate it.